Well, hello there, FC Dallas Curious fan. Thank you for showing up for another edition of Third Degree, the podcast. Hi, I'm Peter, and our resident Brit, Dan Crook, is not with us again because he is efforting towards completion of the much-awaited tifo for the Texas Derby game on Sunday. So Buzz went out and got us a very, and I mean very, special guest, Mark Followill.
Hello.
Come in, Mark Followill.
Can you hear me? Do you read me?
We read you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. When you were talking about Dan and you said that he is preparing for completion, I don't know why, but I was playing like Match Game in my head, you know, where you complete the sentence, with Buzz playing the role of Gene Rayburn, of course. And for some reason, I thought you were about to say that he is in preparation to complete his master's degree. That's what went through my head for some reason whenever you were saying that sentence. I did not think you were going to say it was going to be a tifo.
Well, based on what I've heard, the stories about the construction of this particular tifo, it might as well be a master's degree.
Wow. Okay.
So we'll find out more about that. And, of course, rounding out the trio today is founder of thirddegree.net and co-editor and also from the Dallas Morning News, your hero and mine, Buzz Carrick. Come in, Buzz.
Hello, Peter. Calling in today from Houston, Texas, where I'm helping Wilma Cabrera pack for his trip to Montreal.
I think you're late because I've seen photos of him already in Montreal.
Well, he's still got his stuff up there.
Yeah, the stuff's still in Houston.
Yeah. Now, get out of the pod.
Now,
Buzz is taking care of the pod.
Before either one of us or any of us get into the news at hand, I do have to ask, did anybody else, at least for a little bit, secretly wish and hope that the new Dallas area XFL team nickname was going to be the Doom?
Yeah, that's an old school FC Dallas reference, old school Dallas Burn reference. I also was hoping that's what it would be, but I don't know. Mark may not even know that story. There was this back before they announced all the teams for Major League Soccer in 1996. Some documents circulated around with various things on it, and the one that was for Dallas was labeled Doom something, and so that was apparently Dallas's name before they became the Dallas Burn. So you almost had that as your franchise name.
Well, I'm glad it worked out the way it did with Dallas Burn.
Well, Mark, we're delighted to have you. But before we get started, I did want to announce that, Buzz, you revealed today that you will be creating some new content on a daily basis that people can access by subscribing to your Patreon channel.
Yeah, we're trying to find a way to give Patreons some individual content for those that support us. We're doing the blog, of course, with Dallas Morning News. We do this podcast here, still for sure for everybody to access, but we're trying to give something for the Patreons. And the idea is to be a short little mini 1 or 2 minute daily little news hit for the Patreons. And any level of Patreon can get access to that. And hopefully people will enjoy the content.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the access to that particular daily podcast will not be through the same feed that you get this podcast on. You'll have to go through the Patreon page that you can find on the Third Degree Twitter account, and that's how you'll access it, correct?
Yes, because it's a Patreons only, you have to be able to essentially enter your passwords and username. So you can get it through most podcast services. Once you're subscribed, you can link whatever Patreon account you have to get the podcast from what we use an RSS feed that's password protected. So it is a podcast you can download, or you'll be able to listen to it online with clicking a button, whichever route you want to go. But it's going to be for Patreons only. And if there's people out there who have never subscribed to the Dallas Morning News, this is a chance to get some FC Dallas news without having to go through that route. And like I said, any level a supporter of Patreon can use this. We don't have any tiers or anything like that.
Do you have an average amount you wish people would donate to your Patreon page?
Yeah, $100 a month per listener would be great.
You're a greedy bitch.
Yeah, and I'm just happy to get any kind of support. I am a freelancer in this world, and times are not always great. And I put a lot of effort into this FC Dallas coverage, and hopefully people will like it and contribute. But we're going to do what we do to the greater extent anyway. This just hopefully is a way, if people appreciate what we do, they can support us, and we can return give them something very specific for the support in this case.
All right, shut up. No more shilling. Let's get to the good
Wikipedia
stuff.
asked for $3, so I feel like that's a good starting point.
All right,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Let's get into the meat. Montreal 3, FC Dallas 3. And the question I have for both of you, and Mark, if you'd like to start, you could. Should fans be more enthusiastic about overcoming a 3-0 deficit, or be more bothered by the fact the team got itself into that 3-0 deficit against a really crappy Montreal team missing its best player?
Great question. There's obviously an argument for both sides of that, for sure. I would say in the end, though, I guess you can only control the most recent things that happened. It's kind of like, I'll relate it to Arsenal stories where sometimes at the end of the year I would see supporters online say, well, why are you guys happy they won the last game to barely qualify for Champions League? The bar should be winning trophies. But it's like, well, on the last day of the year when you're already, several points out of ever winning the league, then, at that point, you can't control that. So the carrot that's in front of you is to get whatever you can out of it. So I guess probably at the end of the day, I would lean towards, the most recent thing is the thing that you can control. And the last thing that you did is what you're going to take with you. And so especially if it's a good thing. If it's a bad thing, I guess you won't take that with you. But if it's a good thing, then you'll take that with you. And, no matter how it arrived, at the end of the day, they had to get something out of it. And they got something out of it. So while I don't think I certainly think your question has merit to it, Peter, but I would lean towards be happier that you got the point than frustrated that you were in that position to begin with. But I hope that Lucci's coaching message this week balanced both of those things, because as the coach of the team, to prepare the team for the next game and to go over teaching points. It's a little easier to go over a teaching point when you got something out of it, but there are teaching points that need to be discussed in light of how they got themselves in that predicament in the first place.
I'm going to go with the second half comeback part, and it's because the first two goals that FC Dallas gave up, I think they were the first two, were the Matt Hedges one was definitely a fluky moment of lack of concentration, which that is very rare for Matt Hedges. I'm not worried about that in the long run. And Jesus Ferreira's bad pass across the midfield and across the center channel, terrible decision, a horrible moment. He's a young kid that learns and adapts and doesn't really repeat his mistakes very much. So that's a massive lesson learned for him, but I don't think that's a mistake he's going to make very much anymore. So those are two fluky kind of goals. And for me, the bigger lesson of this being a parity league, and you have to have energy, you have to have motivation, you have to play with an urgency if you're going to compete in this league when you're in a team of parity, when you're a team in the middle of the pack. That lesson, I think, will resonate, and hopefully the team can carry it forward when you're in a playoff chase. So the second half is more important.
So one of the big talking points coming out of the game was the performance by Andrzejic, who obviously scored his first goal for the team, obviously does his thing where he has a lot of energy and will occasionally pick a fight with somebody, which is pretty cool. And there was lots of credit given to him in the difference between the first and second half. But the big difference for me, and this has been a common thing that I've noticed with Lucci, is that the team seems to perform a lot better when Lucci allows them just to play more direct. And that was the tactical difference. It wasn't as much about Andrzejic as it was that the team seemed willing just to play far more like, hey, let's just get to goal on the other side of the field. And I wondered if Lucci talked about that at all this week, Buzz.
Yeah, he did a little bit. Mostly he talked about how the halftime adjustment was to be confident and to be strong and not to let someone else dictate and control the game. As he said, don't play scared. He said, what have we got to lose? Let's go out. Let's be confident and challenge people. And when you put on a guy like Andrzejic, you're going to end up with a more vertical kind of game. And so the game adapted because of that. That was part of the change by bringing him on, was to have players that would go a little more aggressively towards the other end. So that's the message they're trying to ingrain this week, is that you can't go into a game and just expect that if you show up and play, you're going to be fine. You have to bring it every single time. You have to show up and play, and you have to fight. And that's something that this team occasionally lacks a little of. There's no Daniel Hernandez in this locker room ready to punch somebody. The closest guy they might have is least on the field, might be on Dresic. Off the field, he's not like that. Off the field, he's super nice, really cool, very, very effervescent. But he at least is going to challenge people, and that was a positive, and hopefully they'll learn from that.
Mark, when you and Steve were calling the game, and obviously going down as much as they did as quickly as they did in the first half, what was really the sense that you and Steve were talking about at halftime, maybe off the air, of what you were seeing in terms of what was not going right for Dallas before things got so much better?
Well, I think number one, we saw, like Buzz said earlier, we saw two very out of character mistakes, particularly the mistake that Hedges made. So that was one aspect of it that we were talking about, and probably the predominant one that we were talking about. And I would also say that more from, not necessarily from a tactical standpoint, just a discussion of they had to get something out of the match because, I don't like to speak in overly dramatic terms about it, but I think you could make a really strong argument that, if you go there and lose, given their state of play at the time, 6 out of 7 they'd lost at that point in time, Montreal. I thought Steve made an excellent point in the first half of the broadcast. They seemed like they were approaching the game with the same level of urgency that FC Dallas approached the game against Minnesota the week before, knowing that was a do-or-die moment for them, or at least arguably a do-or-die moment for them on their home field, and Montreal was experiencing the same way. So I think we were talking about that, and from a tactical standpoint, just the mistakes were just absolutely costly. And Steve likes to say on the telecast many times that soccer is about moments. And moments don't always, I think a lot of times we associate moments with being moments of great quality and moments where you take your chances well. But moments also can be mistakes, and mistakes that lead to opportunities, and very good opportunities, which they did in the case of Lassi Lapalainen, and he buried both of them. The thing about the playing direct, I don't know that we talked about that a whole lot amongst ourselves. But I will go back to something that we talked about after the game, and it relates back to the Sporting Kansas City game when they won. And one of the things that FC Dallas did in that game, we thought, was adjust as the game went along against the Kansas City press and did start to play more direct. And when we talked with Lucci about it, I don't think Lucci necessarily agrees with the terminology that we as announcers and observers use, play direct. And I'm making air quotes whenever I say that right now, if that helps you with the visual. But what Lucci said is, we don't think that you always have to play A to B to C. If you can play A to C and it's there, play A to C. But make sure it makes sense and make sure that there's synchronized movements that are happening. And because at level B, we happen to make the right movement and everybody else moves in synchronicity with that, then playing A to C makes sense because of what's happening at level B in terms of of one of FC Dallas's players moving, and then that starts the defense moving, and it unsettles the defense. So, so I think that's a little bit more of Lucci's kind of thought process on this concept of playing longer balls and playing direct.
All of those letters are very confusing and complicated, and I don't know if I kept up with that, but I think you made a very good point.
Thank you.
One of the questions that I think does come out of the draw in Montreal is, suddenly this new interest in Ondrejcic as an option at playing at number 9, and up until this point, I think it's not unfair to say that he'd been an afterthought, and pretty much everybody had given up on him. But considering the lack of action between Badji and Ferreira and anybody else they've tried playing in that position, if you throw him in, who now is the player that has to come off the field? And maybe they're rescued by the fact that Mascara is hurt again, and shifting people around. Buzz, do you have any sense of how Lucci's going to solve that out?
Well, you're right. The short-term answer is that Santiago Mascara being hurt gives you an option there, because you could easily move Badji back to the wing, and you could start the Snake up top if you like. In the long run, he's going to have to compete for playing time. Those two positions, the right wing is ingrained with Michael Barrios correctly. The 9 and the left wing are the two positions of greatest need. They went out and got Jassi and tried to buy a left wing. They've obviously tried multiple options at the 9. So those are the two spots. So, whether you're talking about Badji playing both, Jesus Ferreira can probably play both. Cobra, I shouldn't say that. Snake, he's not quite the Cobra yet, is obviously mostly a 9, and Jassi's mostly a wing. Pepe can also do those spots. So those guys are going to be the question marks going forward. And any given week, who performed in training. And let's be clear, because Lucci was very clear that Ondresic earned the playing time he got by the effort and the work he had done in training to improve things they asked him to improve. So, if you can produce during the week, if you can produce during the game, you're going to get more chances. And so that's going to dictate in those two spots who we see week in, week out. And it's going to change based on lots of factors, including who you're playing and what the other team's running out.
Mark, Buzz, I'd like a little. I'd like, I have a lot of thoughts on Ondresic, and I'd like a little table talk. So jump in at any point in time here. I feel like in discussions with Lucci this year that how they want to use a number 9 in terms of their press and the style of play that Ondresic is and what he can do and what he can't do has been one of the biggest things that's held him back in terms of more consistent minutes on the pitch. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The forward press is a big part of it, and having it's not just pace, but having the range to be able to close guys down and read it right and close them down in the right moments is super important, and that's part of why he hasn't been in right. He does fight and he does press. It's timing.
Yeah.
Though.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, Buzz, and before I get to my big picture thoughts on Ondresic, but one of the things is I think when you're a guy like Ondresic, and you get 8 minutes to play or 11 minutes to play, he just seems to me like he's one of those players. And look, there are certainly players who can come in and in a very limited burst be effective. In my humble opinion, I don't think Ondresic is a limited burst player, that his game is not come out and in the dying moments of a match, this guy is going to go get my equalizer or go help me chase the game. I think he needs to be out there, and that's why I like the fact they made the decision to make the sub at the start of the second half on Saturday night, because it just gave the guy a chance to be out there and not thrust in, hey, go on in the 83rd minute and do something for us. Agree or disagree with that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think that he's a wear you out kind of guy. Like playing against him is like 45 minutes, 90 minutes. You're like, I'm so sick of this guy. And that's going to get to you as an opponent, and that's where he's going to make his bones. I agree. Because he lacks an over the top component, he's not going to come in and like within 2 minutes get you something, change the game. He needs the time to grind it, to be fair to him. So I think that's on point, and I think that's part of why they've found that he's not the greatest late game steal a goal kind of sub, and why you've even seen somebody like Brian Reynolds used in that capacity, because he at least brings that sprinter over the top sort of ability, and Badji does that too if Badji comes off the bench. So that's a fair point I think you make on Snake's behalf.
Peter, I've got more things I want to say about Ondresic, but what do you think about my thoughts on those two particular comments?
I think here's the reality. In the 45 minutes he played, he had essentially 4 good touches. There's an all-touch video out there of his 45 minutes. It's 9 minutes long, and it's filled with passing errors, unforced turnovers, inability to win an aerial ball under pressure, and that's about it. I think the guy is not an MLS quality striker. I've thought it since they signed him. I love his energy. I love that he's great in social media videos, and I love that he likes to pick a fight with people, but he's not the solve for the number 9 for this team, and never has been and will never be. He's just not good enough. You are absolutely right, Mark. There are those kind of guys that need more time to be out on the field to find their game and do their thing. The problem is, in the modern game, that type of guy actually ends up hurting a team, because they need somebody that understands how to press in the form of a team, as Buzz was talking about, the timing of pressing, and also needs to be able just to simply to pass the damn ball accurately and not turn it over. And I think that's the real holdback with Ondresic, is maybe eventually he'd find his scoring form, maybe he won't, but so many other aspects of his game are not up to snuff. I just don't think he's the guy, although nobody else so far has played very well in that position, so maybe they're just going to give him a run out for a while.
Well, I think you're probably wanting to get to the idea of, do we think that he should be on the field this week? And to be honest with you, and look, I'm not going to debate that you make a lot of good points. There are certainly weaknesses to his game. I do wonder how he scored 11 goals in Poland in a half season before he got here, and knowing, and I think you guys may have even heard me say this in the telecast, the Golden Boot winner of that league before he came to MLS was Nemanja Nikolic, and then Nikolic came here and won a Golden Boot in his first season with Chicago with 24 goals. So I do think there's at least, and maybe this is an error in judgment on my part, I do think there's at least a track record of one guy coming from that league and being very good and then coming here and having success. And, of course, they're certainly different players, but, that's not a bum league over there, the Polish Ekstraklasa. And the team that he plays for is a pretty quality side, Legia Warsaw. So,
and you know what, Mark, to his credit, the fans...
sorry, it's Wisla Kraków. I said Legia Warsaw. I'm sorry, Wisla Kraków is who he plays for. Legia Warsaw, I believe, is who Nikolic played for.
No, and to your credit, and to his credit, Mark, whatever he was doing over in Poland was so kick-ass, they still love him to this day.
Yes, they do.
Buzz posts pictures on Twitter all the time of them putting things on their video board in games that he hasn't been there for months, and they're still talking about him. So I don't know why he was so much better over there than he is over here, but I'm just not convinced I've seen anything out of the guy yet that he is the solution at the position.
Well, Buzz and Peter, one thing that has been with me for about a month now is, if you'll go back to the 0-0 draw with Real Salt Lake, that particular night, FC Dallas had some shots. They had a lot of crosses that got into the box that night. And one of the things that Lucci said to us in our post-game interview, and I believe that he said it whenever he was speaking to the media and the press conference setting afterwards, was we had a lot of crosses, we got a lot of balls into the box, but then the number of crosses compared to the number of shots, and particularly the number of shots on goal, doesn't correspond very well. And that, to me, is a lack of conviction in the box. And then they go the next week and they go to Orlando, a team who is vastly improved defensively this year compared to the worst team in MLS history from a goal surrendered last season. They're vastly improved this year, but they didn't score in that game. And to be perfectly honest with you, they didn't have a whole lot of great chances in that game either. Obviously they did break out and perform very, very well against Minnesota, and they went right back out on the road against the LA Galaxy and had another game where they had two good chances. Mosquera off the crossbar and a late arriving run by Jesus Ferreira that was just wide early in the second half. And it's just, when I hear Lucci use the word like he did against RSL after the game, we lack conviction. And then I look at multiple times of clean sheets being kept against you in the span of 5 or 6 weeks. To me, it's like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I mean, we always say that's the definition of insanity in the world. And, I felt like it had to be shaken up, and I hear the word conviction, and that's the one thing that I look at with Zdeněk Andrasik, and I see conviction and the willingness to, as we've said many times in this conversation, fight for the team. So I like the idea of him starting. I understand his warts and his drawbacks, but at this point in time, I look at the landscape of the roster and how they played and how it's looked and the kind of chances that they create, and as a side issue to this as well, this puts Badji on the left wing, and this is another discussion point. I think that the best he's looked this year, and I know that he was a number 9 in Colorado, but to be honest with you guys, I think he looks better as a left wing than he has as a number 9 here anyway. And I think that he's played better as a left wing and gives you, while maybe not the moment, Santiago Mosquera has these moments of like, whoa, but then it's like, as Steve says, he creates the almost chance. It's like for a split second, it looks like, oh my God, this could be really good. And then it never comes off. And so I think from a consistency standpoint and a two-way standpoint, Badji is going to give you more than Mosquera is on the left wing, which then puts Cobra or Zdeněk Andrasik. I know you guys aren't calling him Cobra, but it puts Andrasik as your number 9.
We'll give you a free pass. You don't have to put, you don't have to put $1 in the jar.
And it also opens up, I think one thing that Ferreira does well, especially if you're going to play him in this hybrid 8-10 role, is that I do think he's good with little 1-2s and layoffs around the box. And, he gets a layoff. I think he's very good at taking one touch to open up his hips and put himself in a good shooting opportunity. So I think giving this a run out for more than a half of a game, I think really behooves FC Dallas. And by no means do I think that this is the perfect solution, and that, I'm let's see what happens with it, and I may be totally wrong on it. But to me, it's like, this is what I think they have to do right now, and I think the second half of what happened in Montreal is really strong evidence in that regard, that this deserves further testing in the laboratory of on the field to see where it could go.
Okay, but you will at least agree with me that the fact that we are now 27 games into the season, let me rephrase the question. The fact that you're starting him for the first time 27 games or 28th game into the whatever game into the season, does that say more about his qualities or more about the state of the season?
Desperate times call for desperate measures. That's what it says.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And I think the season's in a desperate place, and so I think to answer your question, that's what it tells me. And I would go back to my earlier point with Buzz. I think that, to be perfectly honest with you about it, I don't know that he has been put in the best position to succeed. And I certainly understand that, Lucci's forgotten more than I'll know about it, and he evaluates him based on these bigger picture things. And I'm seeing it from a very narrow perspective of the guy came in and was instrumental one night in getting a historic comeback and a point on the road. And he's judging from a wealth more information than what I'm judging the case from. But I do think that, the 8 minutes here, 11 minutes here formula with Andrasic wasn't getting the best out of him. And so putting him in this particular position that we're suggesting of playing him longer, and obviously you're going to do that if you're going to start him, I think at least theoretically gives you a chance to maximize what he could give you. And maybe some time on the field, by the way, eliminates some of those mistakes that you were discussing earlier, Peter. Maybe there's the more he plays, then there's a little bit more crispness and sharpness and accuracy, if you will, to his passes and his layoffs and his ability to hold up the ball and such.
From your mouth to snake's ears. Buzz, I wonder if you have any thoughts about the state of the midfield at this point. Are you feeling like Jesus is the lock now at that position next to Paxton, and Brian Acosta will forever be slotted as the single holding mid on this team?
Forever, no, but for the short term and probably for the rest of this season, yes. He's done Brian Acosta as the holding mid has done a pretty nice job. He's gotten a little more disciplined. We haven't seen him wander about, and maybe that's because he's by himself now in that position. I did talk to Lucci a little bit about the forcing of the long balls that wasn't so great in the last couple of games, but that's something they're working with him on. Keep it simple, keep it moving, get it to the right people, get it going forward, and he still can occasionally make the run forwards that we like to see out of him. Paxton's in a rough place for himself right now. He did look quite good on Wednesday. Looked really bright, really active. I liked that. That was a big step back forward. But he's in a place where he's running into a minutes log that he's never done anything like this before in his career in terms of how much he's playing. And people are double teaming him and focusing on him. So he's in a tough spot, but difficulties are how players progress. This is where we assume, we think very highly of Paxton as a player, that he's going to make a progression, that he's going to get back into the game. And based on what I saw in training, I feel really good about how he's feeling health-wise and how sharp he looks. And for now, Jesus Ferrer is definitely the guy at the other spot. Lucci raves about the connectivity that he offers, which is, checking back and breaking in between the lines and making little connecting passes. And one of his particularly good skills is how quickly he can receive a ball and turn and go and then make a pass or make a little dribble. He's not spectacular at like a one-on-one go by a guy like Barrios does with pace or like Paxton does with the ball. But as Mark mentioned, he does play pretty good 1-2 combinations. And when he instinctively pulls the trigger, I like that aspect too. So I think for now, I think it's pretty clear that those three guys are going to be your guys until something changes, till they're either eliminated, and then you might see some young guys, or somebody gets hurt, or somebody gets too many yellow cards. That triangle is going to be what Lucci's going to ride until the end of the season.
Yeah.
Well, the yellow card thing's going to happen, by the way, because Acosta's already he's back to within one yellow card of a suspension. So I think it's reasonably safe to assume that's probably going to happen in the not too distant future.
Yeah. Any particular thoughts from either one of you about this odd little spat of him blowing balls? He seems to have picked the Carlos Grazo bug up and overshooting and putting balls into the stands. That some of that high accuracy that we've seen from him early seems to have escaped him in the last.
Well, and my concern with that, Peter, and I'd love to hear what you think about this as well, Buzz, is look, it's okay, and Steve brought this up on the telecast the other night. That's a little bit better or a little bit more tolerable when you're playing as a number 8 because there's cover back there. But when you're the 6, you are the cover. And so when those shots produce a rebound a block and a ball that comes caroming out with great pace, then I mean that's potential counterattacks for the other field, and you're pushed up in an advanced position and you're not able to get back and defend. So, beyond the wastefulness of the chance, it also potentially puts you in a compromised position when it comes to defending. So, that's going to have to be something that's done much more judiciously, especially given the fact that if the shot isn't blocked and leads to a rebound, which potentially puts you in a disadvantageous position for being counterattacked, then the shot is, a country mile over the top and ending up in row Z. So, that doesn't do you any good either, I guess. So
yeah, it's part of his.
So,
go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead. No, I was at the end of my thought. I want to hear what you think.
It's part of his instincts to shoot from range. Acosta, it's sort of built into his game. When you're at 8, that shot's happening at the top of the box or maybe right inside the circle. Those are higher percentage shots. When you're a 6, that shot is happening 40, 35 yards out. It's another good 10 or 15 yards past the top of the circle. So those are poor decisions when you're playing as the 6. As Mark says, it exposes you, but also the percentage shot from there is very low. So it gets back to something that I'm sure Mark and Peter, you'll have heard this too, and in many other sports any of us are involved with, is do your job and trust your teammates. Do what you're supposed to do, which in Acosta's case is to control the play, control the pace, win the balls, quickly get them forward to teammates in better positions. And right now he's trying to do too much. He's trying to force those long passes and bypass the rest of the midfield. He's trying to shoot from 40 yards out. So those are things that he's going to have to learn to adapt his instincts over to effectively what's a new position for him in this system. And the more he plays at that position, the less you'll see that kind of thing. And the more, hopefully, he'll learn to trust his teammates and play in a more economical, more value the ball kind of method, which we know Lucci is huge on that. So I think it'll come.
Yeah, I'm just a little worried that most of that stuff looks like he's trying to force something, and because he has traditionally been so good at that distance, shooting from distance, I worry that maybe he's starting to feel a little weight of responsibility for trying to help the team convert goals. The other question that I thought was interesting from the game in Montreal was the start by Brian Reynolds. Obviously, he was the one that was sacrificed for Andrzezic, but Lucci had some interesting comments in that he seemed to be very supportive of the young guy.
Yeah, he reemphasized that on Wednesday. He said it post game, and he made sure and said it again so that all the assembled media got it. Is it said that he thought Reynolds' performance was good, that he really liked what he was doing, and it wasn't lifted for anything he specifically did. Now, part of that, of course, is Brian's nature and where he's been training is as an outside back. He's at his best when he has the field arrayed before him and he can run at people. And so they were hoping that he would do a little more running at the defense. But that's a mild criticism when you're talking about an 18-year-old kid who's making his first start ever. And that's not why he was lifted. He was lifted to change, to bring in Andrzezic and change the mentality and change the tactic and have Aji on the wing and try and get a little more verticality and a little higher up the field because Reynolds does play so deep and wants to run at people. He wants to come from way back. So it's not a criticism of Brian. And Brian's got a big future that's going to come down the line when someday, maybe when Reggie is sold or when things, his future's not now. It was a solid outing, but the kid shouldn't feel bad about himself for getting lifted. That was a situational necessity based on the fact they were down 3 goals and had to do something crazy to try and get back in it.
Yeah, Mark, I don't remember who you and Steve called for man of the match. I know Buzz gave it to Andrzezic. I thought the clear man of the match was Ryan Hollingshead, and I wondered who you and Steve ended up calling that day.
I think we went with so much happened the other night, but I think we went with Ryan Hollingshead as well. I believe that's who we went with. And interesting that you bring him up in this discussion of Brian Reynolds. And, look, I thought Brian was all right the other night. It was his first start on the road in a position that he hasn't been playing as much this year. As Buzz rightly said, he's been looked at a lot as an outside back this year. We have, and I think there's a lot to be said for a player who's versatile. As you guys both know, there have been times in the past I've referred to Hollingshead as the team Swiss Army knife. And I think it's great that he can play multiple positions and do a lot of different things. I don't think it's a coincidence, though, that in a year where he has been given one specific position on the field, primarily, I mean, he did have to, in a pinch, play center back and right back a couple of times this year. But by and large part, Ryan Hollingshead has been this team's starting left back for 85 to 90% of the season this year. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he's having by far his best year. Look, we said many times when Tesho was here, Tesho was so damn nice and so willing to do whatever the team needed him to do, that he played as a left winger and he played as a 9 and he played as a second striker and he played, in all of these different positions and never really got to concentrate on one thing and be his best at it. And I think that's what's happened with Ryan Hollingshead this year. And I see this versatility that Reynolds has, and that's a nice tool to have. But to be the best player that you can be, I think that zeroing in on one thing is ultimately what you have to do. And I'll take even my own, and maybe this is a dumb analogy, but I had a boss, and Peter, I believe you know this particular person who used to work at the Ticket and was a boss a long, long time ago, 20 years back now. And I said, well, isn't it great that I can do a sports update and host a show during the week or host a pre or post game show for the Diamond Talk or whatever, And he said, well, that's great, but, you've got to focus on the one thing that you really think you're best at and that you want to do. And obviously he knew that was play-by-play at that point in time. And so versatility is a nice thing to have in the world, but I think if you're going to want to maximize whatever it is that you do in life, in your career, zeroing in on one thing and doing it to the best of your ability and really focusing on that, I think I've learned through personal experience and observation is the thing to do. And there are great utility players in all sports out there, and somebody's got to do that, and you can make a darn good living at that. But as it relates to this discussion of Reynolds, as it relates to Hollingshead, our old buddy Tesho, who's having the best year of his career, playing strictly as a number 9, playing as a down-the-middle forward by a large part anyway, in Orlando, I think there is something to be said for that approach with players.
One,
yes,
Mark,
yes or no?
Yeah. One, I was convinced your greatest skill set was square dancing. Play-by-play is second, but kudos to you.
Thank you. Go grab your partner, do-si-do.
And two, I just continue to admire Ryan for his perseverance. One of the hardest things to do in this sport, and it happens a lot, the great Bobby Ryan was in a similar situation, is converting attacking players into defenders, specifically fullbacks. And it's always that there's that weird joke that you tend to hide people at the fullback position, but I just don't always think everybody really fully appreciates the difficulty of that position, especially if you've never played it and now suddenly you're at the professional end of your career and now having to pick up that skill set of understanding how to position yourself and hold a line for offside and all the other things that come along with that. And we've certainly seen the double-edged sword of Ryan trying to learn that position, just like we used to back in the Bobby Ryan days. But, man, I'll be darned if he really hasn't made some real strides this season, defensively in particular. He's just... every MLS team needs one of those guys, not the big dollar guy, not the entry-level dollar guy. They need the foundational guy to do a lot of that heavy lifting. And if Dallas has any one real good thing going for it, it's Ryan Hollingshead. And I thought on that particular night he really shone through, and that's why I thought he deserved man of the match.
Well, he's a guy whose instincts for defense are not right. When we started the season, they were way off, and as he's played in the position, he's become better and better and better. And he still makes a mistake or two a game, but he overcompensates for that, of course, because his ability with the ball, which in Lucci ball is significant. You need a player that can run the majority of the field, that can get forward and can pass and can shoot out of those positions, and that's why you convert offensive players to outside back in a modern game. Reggie has the verticality on the right and needs to work on his move inside to be able to shoot and pass inside. He has the end-to-end part. Ryan's the other way. Ryan comes underneath. He has the shooting, he has the passing. He could use a little more of the verticality and the crossing part, but that's not super important. But his defense has become significantly better, and it's the same reason why you see Brian Reynolds converted to that spot, the ability to run the length of the field. He has the offensive skills of an offensive wing player, and you can convert that to the modern game and coming out of the back. So it's a case where you don't have the defensive first sort of not stagnant, but non-rangy kind of stay-at-home sort of defenders. That's why Marquinhos Pedrosa was traded. He didn't fit this new system. So Ryan, being an offensive first mentality, has excelled. And Lucci even talks about he wants both outside backs to go at the same time. It's not one or the other. It's go. Everyone's going. So when FC Dallas is on and those guys are getting forward and they become the extra attackers and they overload the zones, or when those eights overload the zones, that's when they're at their best. And Hollingshead is a big, huge part of that, and Reggie is too on the other side.
That's a special moment, man, when you get outside backs to do that. I don't know if you guys remember the Haiti-Costa Rica game and the Gold Cup. That was the last game of that particular group, and Warren and I did that game. And that's one of my favorite goals I've ever seen, because Haiti, who never won a group in the Gold Cup, wins their group because in the 81st minute of the game against Costa freaking Rica, who's a 4-time World Cup participant in the last 5 World Cup cycles, and obviously getting towards the end of their golden generation. But at the 81st minute of the game, Haiti scores a game-winning goal because their left back overlapped, got a ball, took it to the byline, crossed, and a run arrives at the back post from the right back, who scores the goal. I mean, that's a thing of beauty, man, when you can get the two outside backs to push up and it works. And we talked to the Haiti coach after the fact, and he said that's probably not something I would encourage to do very often, to have my two outside backs that far up the field, but in that particular case, it worked out. And to Buzz's point about defense with Ryan and his instincts, don't you guys agree, though, the one thing you can say, and I certainly wouldn't argue the point about the instincts, but the thing about Hollingshead that I've always liked is you're going to get an honest performance defensively. Now, does that mean that he's going to be mistake-free? Of course not. And there might be mistakes born out of instincts. But I do think that he's always the effort, the desire, the honest, hard-working mentality about it is always going to be there when it comes to trying to do the right things and the responsible things defensively. Yes or no?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not questioning Ryan's effort and mentality. It's just a question of, the positioning might be slightly off, or the read of the play, it's going to go this way instead of that way, is slightly off. And so much of that comes with time and experience. Mm-hmm. You just got to play into it. If you want to talk,
maybe that's what I'm hoping is going to happen with Andrasic this week.
Yeah, it's
going to
potentially
play into a little bit more sharpness. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to talk, this sort of mentality of playing into things, one of the reasons why they've sent away Emmanuel Amasi was because they're working on him in the same capacity as an outside back. And they suggested to the Austin Bold, hey, we want to use him this way. Would you guys be interested? And they've taken him, and they're starting him as an outside back. And he had one of those end-to-end goals where he ran the whole length of the field just this last weekend and scored, following off. They had a corner kick by the other team, and he ran in support 90 yards and scored. So, it's that kind of mentality, that kind of belief in yourself and your willingness to work and put in the effort, because Ryan has worked really hard to get better at his defense. There's no question. And it's going in the right direction. It's a little late in the career, so we don't know how long it's going to last, but he's definitely made the same conversion Bobby Ryan did, and so far so good for FC Dallas.
But earlier I brought up the idea, and you guys didn't offer a lot of feedback. I think we just got onto other things, but the idea that Badji is the left wing for this team for a lot of minutes in the remainder of the season moving forward. Left wing to me has been the most disappointing position on the field this year because of the number of different people that have been tried there, the lack of consistent performance of those who have been there, the up and down nature of it. It's one thing to start different players because of injuries and call-ups and yellow card suspensions, as you can point to in other places on the field. But let's face it, for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them not good reasons because of inconsistency of the players performing there, left wing has been a revolving door this year. And I thought the best Badji's looked and the best the team has had in terms of left wing performances when he played there this year. So I think another reason why I'm on board with this whole Andrasic play as the number 9 thing is because the default thing, especially this week with Mosquera hurt to begin with, is it puts Badji on the left wing. Do you guys like that? Do you think that am I high by thinking that? What do you guys think on that front?
Well, the person that agreed with you was Oscar Perea. When he first got Badji, he and I talked at length about how he felt in the short run that Badji would be a 9, but he said in the long run he's going to be a winger. that's where he's going to be for this club. And I would agree with you that I think Baji plays better as a 9 for the same reason that Ryan Hollingshead actually does well on that wing, playing further back, is because Baji's instincts are wrong for when his runs into the box happen as a 9. He doesn't make the right angles, and he doesn't have the right timing. So if you put him further back out on the wing, he has the pace and the ability both to get down the wing and cross, and to cut in on an angle and shoot sort of from the top of the box kind of range. And he is better in that position. I agree completely. And that's an added bonus. And the fact that no one has, the fact that went out and spent some money in that position ought to tell you something, even though that has not worked out. There definitely is a wide open spot on that left wing, and he certainly could fill it. The problem is so far they haven't had anybody do the 9 either. So if they can get, if Andresic can do anything in there at all, then Baji might get a real run at left wing, or else you're going to go to the next option, which I suppose will be Pepe at the 9, which maybe we're not quite ready for that yet, but let's keep that in the back of our minds, as that might be what's next.
He did have a really good defensive moment late in the game the other night.
He did. Pepe or Baji?
Pepe,
yeah.
Yep.
I actually talked to Lucci about that this week, because I when I watched the game, I thought, boy, you had him playing 2 positions, and he said yes. They asked him defensively, because he came in for Jesus. I think it's who it came in for. He was playing kind of as an 8 defensively. He had to compress and do the midfield work, but he also asked him to make that 20-yard run every time they got the ball to play as a second striker next to Andresic. So that's a big ask for a 16-year-old kid, and he performed admirably in both aspects of the play for the short time that he was in there.
All right, so it's all moving towards the big game on Sunday. FC Dallas is touting this as this one is personal. It is the Texas Derby. The Houston Dynamo are rolling into town, and they need wins just as badly as Dallas does. The one weird X factor is Wilmer Cabrera was fired since the last time they played a game, and now Davey Arno is the coach. And Dallas now has to face a team with that classic situation of, we've got a new coach, the new coach bump, as they call it. Buzz, any particular lineup adjustments that you're anticipating for Sunday afternoon's game?
Yeah, I think Mark is correct about Andresic getting the start, and I'm gonna give both my reason why and why I think it's good and why I think Lucci's doing it. The first is that, and I've mentioned this a little bit earlier in the podcast, in a competitive league, in a parity league, you need a little extra something. You need some juice. You need some fight. You need to show up and bring it. He did that. That was why I made him the man of the match, not for his play, for the fact that he came into the game and he changed the mentality of the team. And mentality, and I talked to Lucci about this week, and he said Lucci actually said it's the most important aspect from here out the rest of the season is this team's mentality. Because when their mind is right and their attitude is right and they're overloading and they're getting those extra players in there, that's when they're at their best, and that's when they play some pretty good soccer. So you're going against your rival. You need somebody that's going to step up and knock somebody down. It's going to get in somebody's face like Cobra did at the end of the game. Snake did at the end of the game. So I think, for all those reasons, I think Lucci's going to start Andresic at the 9, and I think he's correct to do it. And I don't mean that he's the answer for the year. I mean for this game, because when you ask a guy to come in and change his mentality, and he does, and you ask a guy to play a 9 and he scores, and you ask a guy to get shots on goal and he has 3 shots and all 3 of them were on goal. Now, granted, the header could have been better, and the quick shot he did take, I really liked, although the keeper saved it. It was a really nice shot. So, and then you add in the component of Baji on the wing, because you can't start Jassi. He's not doing anything that makes you think he's going to be good enough, and Mosquera's out, and Ferreira's entrenched in the midfield. So you're gonna have your basic back 4 in the same. Those 3 midfield triangles the same, and you're going to see Andresic and Baji on the left wing, and Andresic is the 9, and that's how you're going to roll out, and you're going to battle your arch rival for a game that matters for both these teams. The team that loses this game is essentially out of the playoffs, as near as I could tell. You got to win this next 2 home games for FC Dallas, and that's why you're going to see Andresic start.
What's your big talking point for this upcoming game Sunday night, Mark?
Well, I agree with everything Buzz just said, number one. I mean, I think that's just an outstanding tactical analysis. The talking point, though, is that, this is 2 teams in a very, very similar boat. It's rivals, it's desperation, because Buzz is exactly right. The loser of the game can kiss bye-bye to the playoffs. Houston still has a lot of work to do, even if they do earn 3 points out of it. But forget about it if they don't. And you also have the aspect of two teams both dug in and fought last week. The managerial change happened with Houston. It did not for the first 45 minutes against Colorado produce the new manager bump. It did in the second 45 minutes, and Mauro Manotas, of course, had a little bit to do with that, scoring 2 goals in the second half, and FC Dallas just had a 3-0 to 3-3 comeback. So you have some striking similarities between the two teams in terms of what they just experienced this past match day and what's out in front of them. And then there's the rivalry aspect of it as well. And one other thing, one thing that we're going to talk on the Fox broadcast from a Houston standpoint is I think Manotas is a very, very underrated player. He is in the top 5 in the league, although he went from 4 to being tied for 5th based on Carlos Vela last night. But in goals scored in MLS since the start of 2017, Joseph Martinez is running away with that with 71. Nemanja Nikolic has 50. Zlatan has 42 in 2 seasons. Manotas has 40, and Vela has 40 in 2 seasons. So, those are your top 5 goal scorers in the league in the last 3 years. So there's some star power in this game with Manotas. And there's been times when I thought that Albert Talise, by the way, would provide some star power. And, he consistently has not done that. There have been certainly moments of brilliance, but he's coming into this particular game on a 6-appearance stretch since he scored a goal. He had a 2-goal, 1-assist game against New York Red Bulls on July 3rd. If you guys remember, he got sent off very early against Atlanta United shortly after that when Atlanta United throttled them 5-0. But of course, he got sent off in the 6th minute of the game, I believe. So he hasn't been between suspension after that and whatnot. He just hasn't been a very good player after that. So is he ready to get it rolling? I think that's something certainly to watch for. And those are the main talking points that I have about it. I'm anxious to see if we'll see DeMarcus Beasley one last time. He hasn't played a whole lot this year, 7 games, but one of the great names of the sport in our country is about to step aside from his professional career. And so does he get back out there in front of the fans of Dallas one more time? That would be kind of neat if he did. Don't know what it would mean as it relates to the game, but it would be neat to see him out there. And of course, look, one thing we know that if he's out there, that a Minor Figueroa plays, and if he does play, by the way, it would be his 100th league match since he came into MLS 5 years ago, is that he can take a lot of players out of a defense with that long diagonal that he hits very, very well. I would think FC Dallas, knowing him, would have that scouted out, but I do think that that's a dangerous aspect to consider when you're thinking about tactics defensively against Houston. Is obviously you got talent up front, but Figueroa can do some things, as we saw in his time here, that sometimes can put your defense in a real negative place because of his ability to hit the long diagonal.
One piece of subtext will be Christian Ramirez, who many FC Dallas fans would have liked to have seen this club try and play for as a late season addition, and he went to Houston. So just something else to watch for.
$250,000 was that deal, and it's 175, I think, of GAM and 75 of TAM. Although I could have that, it might be the other way around. But that's the breakdown on the trade. And they also just acquired Nico Hansen in a trade with Columbus Crew as well. And I think that they made one other player addition of note the other day as well. I think they acquired one other player through trade that might be part of the mix. Or you know what? They didn't trade for him, but they just signed a guy named Jose Bizama, who had played and has had a cup of coffee a couple of times with Chile at the international level for the Chilean national team, and he's played there professionally for 5 years now. So they've had a defender that just came over from Chile that has played in 1 game against Philadelphia so far as well.
With Houston coming to town this weekend, I want to shift the conversation a little bit. The Houston Chronicle in the last week has posted 2 stories that I thought were really fascinating from an outsider's perspective. One was an opinion piece, just basically kind of running back over the woes the Dynamo have had in recent years in terms of attendance. And then there was a follow-up piece that I thought was fascinating because it included a bunch of feedback the writer had gotten from Dynamo fans, season ticket holders, etc. And I not that I was surprised by this, I did find it fascinating that you could have almost taken any of the complaints about the Dynamo and crossed out the word Dynamo and written in FC Dallas, and you would have, it was almost word for word things that people complain about FC Dallas are complaining about the Houston Dynamo. And I wondered if either one of you read those articles and had any similar reaction to it.
I did read them, and I actually had the exact same reaction you did, was that it sounds exactly like the problems we have in Dallas, minus the Frisco's far away part. Two teams that have not been able to get any ground, get any relevancy in their markets, for whatever reason, they don't appeal to the soccer bases in their towns. I don't know that I have any solutions overnight, or else I might be running things, and I'm not. So certainly they're both teams that should do better than they do in terms of making traction and getting people to pay attention to them in their given markets.
And I saw Buzz say that on Twitter, and I tried I clicked on the link for that article to look for the fan reaction, but I guess maybe it took me to the original article and not the article with the fan reaction, so I can't really offer any comments on that. But the fertility of the soccer market in both cities, I would agree wholeheartedly, is the teams should be doing better than they are, and I don't know what the solutions are, short of, I do feel like when we saw the team win at a high level, I think back to the great crowd there was for the Open Cup final when FC Dallas played New England in 2016, and some of the energy that was around the team when they pushed and won Supporter Shield in 2016 as well. So you would like to think that winning solves a lot of those problems. And maybe if there's winning at a high level moving forward, then it's more than just part of a season or a short stretch, but it's really something that you can build on. Then hopefully that will happen from the FC Dallas perspective.
Yeah, I think what's interesting in the comments from the Houston fans is an element that doesn't really have anything to do with winning. Because remember, Houston's won MLS Cup a couple of times since being in Houston. They've won Supporter Shield, U.S. Open. Yeah. I mean, that's a winning organization, at least in terms of silverware. What really struck me as similar was the comments about community and fan connection and engaging the fan base and making the fans feel engaged with the club and game day experiences. Obviously, Houston has a stadium situation in terms of location that people would kill for here in Dallas. I mean, it's essentially sits in their version of geographically is Deep Ellum would if you put a stadium in the Dallas area. So I thought all of that was super fascinating, and it leads me into this next part of the conversation, which was the article that appeared in The Athletic yesterday, I think it was. Sam Sketchstall. I can never pronounce Sam's last name. Mark, you're the name pronunciator. I don't know if you know how to pronounce his last name.
That's one I don't.
Okay.
That is one I
fair enough.
It might be Sketchstall, but I'm not. Oh, great. I'm sorry, Buzz.
I'm just going with Sketchel.
Sketchel. Okay. Well,
that's how I say it.
Sam interviewed Dan Hunt, and it's essentially an article talking about, the FC Dallas business model of homegrowns and growing their own and this, that, and the other. And, the takeaway comment from Dan for me that I thought really just perfectly summed up maybe people's frustrations with how the team is run was the quote, "I think we're fine doing it just like this." And what he means by that, and there's a larger paragraph that goes along with that in the context, was we believe in the business model of trying to win MLS Cup using our homegrowns. And, I read that article literally about an hour before I watched Carlos Vela score that insane goal last night for LAFC. And I thought, man, those are two clubs working in very, very different mentalities. And I've always, Mark, you and I have never talked about this. You arrive into this in terms of a professional broadcaster that gets to see all sorts of professional sports teams, not just in soccer, but in basketball, not just based in the United States, but globally. And I don't think, and if I'm wrong about this, Mark, please correct me, I don't think you come weighted down with the perspective of somebody who's been watching this club since the Cotton Bowl days, at least at a very very, very, at a media person's kind of like in and day out level. And I just wonder your perspective about how the Hunts, Dan and Clark, run the team and versus and how that you feel that operates compared to the LAFCs, the Atlanta Uniteds, and the Seattles of MLS.
Well, yeah, my Cotton Bowl days were doing PA. So I did PA from 1998 to 2004. So not the Victor Villalba, the great Spanish voice of the Cowboys and the Mavericks.
You
was
did.
The bilingual PA announcer in 96 and 97 and
I
98.
failed to remember that. I apologize,
Yeah.
Mark. You were the Cotton Bowl PA guy. I forgot about that.
That's quite all right. I feel like that if nothing else, I started the concept of get real over the top with how you announce the starting 11. And start. And one of my favorite memories of that is at the old mill. You guys went to the old mill inn after.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, of course. And
Got to
Bobby
watch
Ryan, the
Dave.
first time I met Bobby, he said, and somebody said, yeah, he started doing the PA a few games ago. And Bobby's like, oh man, you're the guy who's like really announcing the starting lineups real crazy. It's like, yeah, that's me. And he goes, no, man, the players notice it on the field. We dig it. Thank you. And that shows what kind of guy Bobby is, and meant a lot to me that he said that. And that's one of the most endearing memories and stories that I have, and I'll never forget that goes back now plus 20 plus years, and he said that to little old Mark Followill.
Well, maybe you are then weighted down with the perspective of watching this from day one, and maybe my question is moot at this point. But I am fascinated from your professional perspective of watching the Mavericks and all these other massive NBA teams, and then all of your experience with Fox Soccer, both on an international and club level. Just any kind of additional insight and perspective you might have would be interesting, I think, to most people.
My number one perspective is, as the years have gone by, Peter, I've tried to disassociate myself as much as I can with getting too wrapped up in the decisions that are made by Mark Cuban and Donnie Nelson, or Dan and Clark, or when Fernando was the technical director, or whomever, in terms of player acquisition. My job is to take the product that they're putting together and make it sound and look and describe it in as an appealing fashion as I possibly can. And that's been, especially as the years have gone by, and you can let your mind get caught up in a lot of things if you allow it, given a lot of the voices that are out there and a lot of the, quite frankly, what can be sometimes negative influences if you spend too much time reading what people have to say about social media. Social media doesn't necessarily lend itself to the measured, positive, long-range viewpoint of things. It's obviously very reactionary, and quite frankly, a lot of times it's very negative. As far as the idea of winning MLS Cup with 11 homegrowns, the one thing I would say is I think that one thing I feel like I've noticed when it comes to experience of mine in pro sports is that whatever your plan or your system is, I guess there needs to be commitment to it. There have been Moneyball ways that have won in other sports. There have been big spending ways that have won. There have been youth movement ways and drafting well and building your team that way. In our sport that we're discussing here, I guess on the world stage, Ajax, obviously, and the Dutch Eredivisie probably comes to mind as the club that can build up young players through its academy, get them to play well enough where they can be a factor in their domestic league, and quite obviously be a factor in continental competition, as we know over the last couple of years. And it's just a memorable run in Champions League that disappointingly came to an end around too soon last year from their perspective. But you've got to be committed to that plan. And I think that when it comes to FC Dallas, the one thing about winning it with 11 homegrowns is I think we know that really at the end of the day that probably there's a desire to do that. But the fact that they are active in the marketplace internationally, the fact that they have made some pretty savvy signings when they've gone to try to mine talent out of South America, but also have had some big swings and misses, are indicative of the fact that I don't think that door will ever be closed off for FC Dallas. There's player personnel connections and enough that's always going to be some level of conduit. And it worked with Mauro Diaz, and it's worked pretty darn well with Michael Barrios. And then, of course, as we know, there's been some spectacular flameouts in that regard as well. So that's the perspective I have on it is, number one, I try to not get too wrapped up in that, but I think my best advice for any team that's putting together any sort of plan in terms of how we're going to put the team together is commitment to a system, says a lot in terms of what you're going to do. And so the one thing I would say about this year is this idea of homegrowns. I think that has been spoken about in glowing terms here in the past, but the commitment to it wasn't there in terms of how that manifested itself with a lot of players on the field. Some got out there, Kellen and Victor and Jesse, but we've all been waiting for Paxton in particular and other homegrowns to get their opportunity in the last couple of years, and Oscar gave some of them a chance and others didn't. And this year, as we now know, 4 or 5 homegrowns routinely start every game, and so I suppose that's commitment to a system, and we'll see what that means for improving those players in a position to make them good enough to be competing on not just barely squeaking into the postseason, but maybe competing on a higher level next year. Augmented, of course, with the right outside talent, because I think we all understand that they're still not at a place where you're winning MLS Cup anytime soon with 11 homegrowns out of this academy. It has to be augmented with smart signings from elsewhere.
Yeah, and Buzz, we'll kind of wrap this up here in a second about talking about the run into the end of the season and the playoffs. But I do think it's interesting to take a second to recognize the fact that in Montreal, in a game that Lucci really wanted to at least get something out of, he took a kid off the field. He had another kid on the bench in Pepe that he could have put on at the beginning of the second half. But instead, what he chose to do was to turn towards quote-unquote veterans. And I think it's probably not unfair to say that is, for all the dreaming we have about having 11 homegrowns on the field and, older teenagers and young 20-somethings from the various DFW Metroplex high schools, the reality is for this team really to be competitive at this point, they are still going to need to lean on these guys that they bring in, and they got to be smarter about the types of players they bring in.
Yeah, I think there's no question. You can't miss on your foreign signings at this phase of this program that Dallas is in. You have to have Dallas is always going to be budgetary conscious in terms of their signings. You can't miss on them, because then you're left with a whole bunch of kids and no veteran options, because, as you say, coaches always go to the veteran players when things get tight. That's just how it goes. You don't play the 16-year-old kid. You play the 26-year-old guy. Now will FC Dallas reach a stage where Paxton and Jesus are the 26 and 27-year-old guys? I don't know. That's going to take some commitment from the organization. And one of the takeaways from Schedul's article was that they're in negotiations with those 2 guys to keep them. That's great. But that's the story of this season, and we've talked about it all year. Is that I expected them to get a little bit of a boost from a couple of their signings that they made over the winter and the summer, and that did not happen. So this team is where it is. This team is young. And without having those guys have been a success, that's why you're in the middle of the pack and fighting for a playoff spot instead of being at the top of the Western Conference. Now, granted, you're not going to be LAFC good, not right now, not without spending that kind of money. So, it is what it is, and the cards are dealt for this season. So now it's a question of trying to figure out how to best arrange this limited hand you have and see if you can win some games and get in.
All right, so now
I think Lucci's done a nice job, Buzz, and he has developed more pragmatism in terms of his decisions as the year has gone on. And Lucci's the first person. I've talked to him at training, and he says, "Hey, I've learned things this year and things that I thought were a good idea. Sometimes I realized, sometimes I have to do some things differently." But I think Lucci still has a pretty good balance this year of pragmatism to win games, but still staying committed to the project of we are going to give young homegrown players opportunities here, and they're going to get significant opportunities, and one moment of failure does not mean that the plug is going to be pulled on them. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, it's a big project. I was nodding as you were talking. You probably couldn't see it. There is, this season all along has been the first season under a new coach. He's reviewing, he's learning, he's reviewing the team. They're trying a new concept, evaluating that new concept. How's it going? So this season was never really about this season. They didn't go into this season thinking we're going to win a cup. This wasn't you try and win, don't get me wrong, but no, I don't think anybody would have been honest with themselves and said, oh yeah, this is the year. No, this was an evaluation. It's a new thing. And he has worked a pretty good balance. He does talk all the time about we learned something. We learned from this. We learned from that. On the field, off the field, everything they do, they evaluate. They self-evaluate really well. So, there's a lot of positivities about the direction they're going. The big question remains, are the Hunts committed enough to retain these kids to give them a chance over the next 3 or 4 seasons to become a really top-end team or not? Because that's different than just playing them and selling them. That's a different level of commitment, and we're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I do think that if you get a chance to talk to Lucci sometime, and I know you do, Buzz, and I know you do, Peter, and get him going on the playoff race. I think I asked him one time how you maintain the balance between talking about a project, but obviously talking about the importance of 3 points on a week-to-week basis. And he says, look, it's all in the messaging. I mean, we're doing big picture evaluation. But when we get into the room, we're not talking to players and talking about, we're not filling their head all the time about big picture evaluation. We're in there talking about, guys, we have to get 3 points tomorrow. Guys, we have to get in the playoffs. We have to get in the playoffs. And there's usually, Lucci's a fiery guy, so sometimes there's some good. Some colorful wording that goes along with that, it's fun to talk to him, and it's fun to see that he has a passion for the project and the big picture, but he also has a passion for competing and winning and getting results on a week-to-week basis this year. And I love talking to him and love seeing that side of him when he discusses that kind of stuff.
All right, so we move into Sunday, the big game as we were talking about earlier, and I still am a believer that the team is going to miss the playoffs, although once I started digging into the actual schedules and the numbers, I started to feel a little bit more hopeful in this. So with the games remaining, Dallas only plays one team with a winning record, and that would be NYCFC that they get to play at home. Everybody else is struggling. In fact, 3 of the teams have 500 records, 3 of the teams have losing records, and of the remaining teams, Dallas has actually beaten all of them with the exception of Houston, who they lost to, and they get their opportunity to exact some revenge. They're 3-4-3 in their last 10 games with an absolute the goal differential is 0, and that's the one little bugaboo in this is they've been shut out 4 of their last 7 games, but they've scored 8 times in their last 3. And as you go through and kind of dig through the other teams that are around them in the standings, Minnesota, the Galaxy, Salt Lake, Seattle, San Jose, Portland, Houston, and Real, and what's the last one? Salt Lake. Kansas City. Dallas actually has one of the easier schedules, and now that's just based on points per average and home and away. But if you're just going to base it solely on points per game, Dallas has the 4th easiest schedule. Portland has the easiest, along with having almost all home games remaining. They've only got one road game left.
Portland plays 8 of their last 9 at home, right?
Yeah, and then the second easiest schedule is LAFC, who you just don't count because they don't have to play themselves, right? Which is really...
They're not going to drop back into any sort of competition about not missing or about not making the playoffs.
Yeah, so the team that you really want to watch out for, because it's only going to take one team to push Dallas out, appears to be Salt Lake, who have a slightly easier schedule. They've got a game in hand on Dallas, and they've got a it'll be interesting. That may be the team to really watch Dallas have to run through. They don't face each other again through the course of the season.
Well, look, the hardest schedules to me are San Jose, although they did, now the LAFC thing is behind them. It will be very interesting to see what happens with Matias Almeida. Does he face? Do you guys think have you heard anything? Is he getting suspended for last night's outburst? Do you think he's facing a 1 or 2 match touchline suspension for what went down last night? What do you think?
I have not heard yet. The committee will come out in the next couple of days, I'm sure, but I imagine he might get a game or 2. Yeah, it's pretty strong.
Yeah. So I think that's certainly that's a hurdle for them.
Did he write a slur on the piece of paper and actually hand it to the referee, though? Did he do that?
That's
that part I don't
reference.
know. Oh yeah, Peggy reference. Yeah, that part. Yeah, I'm not sure.
He handed Caleb Porter a tissue.
Minnesota's got to play LAFC twice. They've got to play. I think they've got to play Atlanta United, and not just talking about the Open Cup final. They've got to play them in a regular season game. They've got to play Portland. They've got to play Real Salt Lake. So Minnesota, has a conceivable, if things don't go well for them, I mean, they may get 7 or 8 points the rest of the year if they're not able to go out and get some results on the road, or if they trip up against good teams at home. They could be staring down a 7 or 8 point run in for the rest of the season, and San Jose might be staring at a 9 or 10 point run in, 12 point run in for the rest of the season, which would put them up at 50 points, and that's an attainable number for FC Dallas. And the other thing, too, I don't think I heard you mention, Peter, FC Dallas playing Seattle. Seattle doesn't have like a total bear of a schedule for the rest of the way, but you do go up there and play them, which isn't the most enticing of prospects. Number one, Seattle hasn't been. Seattle hasn't been as good since Chad Marshall. And at least the one thing you would say is that you control your situation relative to one of the teams in front of you when you go play them, because then that's a 6-pointer. So that's a big ask to go up there in a midweek game after you played at Chicago on September 14th. I believe they play at Seattle then on Wednesday night, September the 18th. That's a big ask, but that is a game to circle on your calendar. In terms of FC Dallas can really help themselves in terms of playoff fortunes. And then right after that, by the way, they got to come home and play one of their other really, really hard games left in terms of NYCFC. But I think both of the two of you would agree. The bottom line is this. All of this discussion is a big waste of time if they don't get 6 points in the next 2 games.
I would totally agree. In fact, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that the critical games in the remaining 2 are these next 2 home games, because it's the 2 teams with the worst records that they're going to face in Houston and specifically in Cincinnati. They're home games. One's a derby game, and you get to exact revenge for the loss earlier in the season. And obviously Cincinnati's just a debutante team, and you need to get your 3 points against them. If they do get the 6 points in these 2 games, the run-in after that suddenly starts to look a lot more clear, again, depending on how some other results turn out.
And you can take a breath too, Peter.
Yeah.
Buzz.
Yeah.
And because then you've got the international break, and they won't play again until the 14th. So you'll have some time. You guys are talking about Paxton, and who knows, maybe he gets called into the U.S. team. I don't know. But I mean, I've seen some people speculate about that. But you have at least theoretically some time for some young players who are playing way more than they ever have to catch their breath and rest a little bit, and you can manage some things to get them ready for the final, what would it be at that point? Then it would be a final 5-match push where you're going to have a really, you're going to come right out of it, and you're going to play 3 games in 8 days. So these next 2 games, I mean, given who the opponents are, where the games are being played, and what you have out in front of you, I mean, 6 points is an inarguable necessity out of
minimum
coming down here.
Oh yeah, I think both these games are winnable. I think Houston's a mess. They got some talent, but with the coaching change, they're still trying to figure things out. It's tough to play on the road in MLS everywhere. So coming into Dallas, I know that Houston's hot too, but coming into Dallas is not ever going to be easy. Cincy on the road, I mean, that's a game. If you don't win that game, you don't deserve to be in the playoffs.
Yep.
It may come down to the last game of the season when you're hosting Sporting Kansas City here in Frisco, and San Jose has to go to Portland. That might be that those 2 games right there might, for FC Dallas, might be the answer. Are you getting in or not? When you get down to it.
I think maybe isn't. Let me look here. I think Minnesota might be playing a pretty tough game. Yeah, Minnesota's at Seattle that weekend. As well, and maybe you guys feel a little bit more confident about Minnesota. But okay, I've got their schedule now, by the way. So they're playing Sporting Kansas City tonight on the road, by the way, at LAFC, at Houston, home Real Salt Lake, at Portland, home Sporting KC, home LAFC, at Seattle.
2 LAFCs.
That's a tough schedule for Minnesota, man.
Yeah,
that's a tough schedule, dude.
That is tough. I look at San Jose's got to go 3 road games in a row: RSL, New York City FC, and Atlanta, 3 in a row, and then Philly back home. And then they get Seattle at home, and then they get Portland on the road. I mean, those 6 games are tough. That's for me that looks like the biggest potential collapsible team. But you make a case for Minnesota. So that's a fair case too.
Yeah,
so
but here's
those are 2 teams
guys,
to look for.
But you got a big gap on Minnesota, though.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Right,
There's
Peter?
a 5-point gap. That's the thing that I'm thinking. They have a lot of room to stumble, including a game in hand. And you're right. They've got the most difficult schedule, but that fact that they've successfully gotten themselves to 42 points already is. that's why I don't think they're the team that bombs out of this. If anybody does, it's going to be a Salt Lake or hopefully an Earthquakes, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, man. I feel like that if RSL has survived what they've survived, I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah, they've had a pretty interesting season for sure.
They especially the last few weeks, obviously, and they've not only survived it. I mean, quite honestly, they're thriving in the face of a lot of adversity lately. I mean, they came here 3 hours after Petke got suspended, and I thought they played a pretty darn sound tactical match that night. And they've gotten results at home since then. And yeah, they've been more than solid in my book. The other thing too about this weekend is, man, one little bugaboo they've had against Houston in recent derby games is last year. Remember, 89th minute equalizer to Pena, the Venezuelan player for Houston, when they played one of those games last year that ended up 1-1. Or maybe that was in 2017. Maybe that was the year that they did that. But there's one game recently where they gave up an 89th minute equalizer down there, and then they had a 3-1 lead in a game in August of 2017 here and gave up 2 goals in the last 20 minutes, including another 89th minute. Cubo Torres, as a matter of fact. Eric Torres is the player who scored those 2 goals, and one of them was in 89th minute. So, if you do get a lead against Houston, however much of a mess you think that they are, Buzz, man, you've got to play that one. That is going to require 90 minutes of focus and no switching off, because I think there's enough attacking talent out there that could hurt you if you get into protecting a 1-goal situation at the end.
Yeah, and that's why Lucci said the most important aspect over the stretch run for this team is going to be mentality, getting your mind right, focus, having the right attitude was going to be key, because if they are get their brain where it needs to be and are on the front foot and are aggressive, then they're fine. If they sit back and play passive, they'll be out inside of as soon as they lose this Houston game.
Yep. You know what, Peter?
Yes, sir.
Soccer is a talking sport. Did you know that?
I did know that.
We have talked for an hour and 20 minutes. This is not the first time I've commandeered somebody's podcast like this. This is a talking sport, dude.
It most certainly is, and you're good at it, and that's why we were honored that you would take time from your illustrious broadcasting career of the highest level and come down here to the low grounds of podcasting with Buzz and I.
I love effing soccer, and I love to talk about it. And so, and I didn't know what we're allowed to say on this podcast. My normal thing would be I would have said it more colorfully in that particular place, but out of discretion, I edited myself there. But I love talking about it, and it's a lot of fun to discuss, and I've really enjoyed chopping it up with you guys for the last 80 minutes.
Yeah, well, Buzz says boobies all the time, so don't worry about it, Mark.
Do I?
Oh, man, wow.
No, I don't.
How are we ever going to recover from that?
Well, Mark, it's like a Benny Hill show.
I've told you in person, and I've said it. I've said it to your face. I've said it away from your face. I love your work. I enjoy the fact that you get to do the FC Dallas games. I love watching you do the Mavericks. I'm a huge fan of yours, and thank you for coming to do this.
Anytime, man. You guys reach out anytime. I love doing it, and it was a lot of fun to chat. Hopefully, we'll have an end of season playoff preview show we can do or something like that.
We should.
That would be real nice.
And Andy and I would love to have you on the kick around again sometime soon.
Anytime.
All right.
You got it, man. And Buzz, good to talk to you as well, man. A lot of fun, and glad we got to break it down, man. It was a good time.
Yes, it was a pleasure.
All right, awesome. All right, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Buzz. And thank you, good FC Dallas fan. We will speak to you next time on another edition of Third Degree, the podcast.